We're very fortunate today that we have somebody who is CEO of one of the largest Islamic finance businesses here in the Middle East come to talk to us. So I'd like to introduce Tirad Mahmoud. Tirad.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. The topic of the day is about leadership, and I haven't really brought with me any speaking notes, so I'm going to improvise. To me, I've read a lot of articles, a lot of books about, what leadership is and what is the difference between a leader and a manager, and it's very interesting to read these things. But I have a few observations that I can share with you. I think, I've noticed some leaders in history who brought massive change, who did not go to business schools and did not run businesses, but they brought massive change. And if we look at this region, it's been blessed with leaders thousands of years ago. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a leader. Don't look at it from a religious point of view, because that will distort the issue. But look at what he has done. He was born in the desert, in an area that was totally fragmented, full of tribal wars and conflict. Two superpowers surrounding the region at that time, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. And within 23 years, he had no oil and no gas. Within 23 years, he transformed the region. He changed it massively. The people followed him because he gave them a better tomorrow. He was able to see a picture, and that picture that he saw, and he was able to articulate and communicate to the people. They felt it, they believed in it. Many were willing to die for it. And we all know the history of this region. And today, I would say that leadership is not something that you learn only or something that you're born with. It's a very complex issue. I don't remember who spoke about, I think today, about Steve Jobs and Apple. I mean, what Steve Jobs has done is change the world. He brought a new paradigm. And the people that worked for Steve Jobs did not work for the money. They believed in the change that he was bringing. And he actually did change the world. There's another leader that I very much admire, and that's Bill Gates. And I don't admire him because he created Microsoft. I admire him because he donated all his wealth, almost all of it, back to charity work. And he has begun massive change in the world. Warren Buffett, another top 5 billionaire, did the same thing. And that kind of initiative and that kind of leadership does bring massive change. People follow that. So leaders, in my mind, have to see something that brings a better tomorrow for the people. And the people are always in pursuit of a better tomorrow. So if I were to talk about my observation, I'll say, a leader that brings a better tomorrow for us is a leader worth following. And that's the single most important observation that I have about it. From my own experience, I joined ADIB, which is Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank. I call it ADIB for short. When I looked at ADIB, and I was at that time I was with Citigroup, 25 years with them, and I said, this is an interesting opportunity. And what I saw in it was not a better package of compensation or better prestige. What I saw in it was an opportunity to create a better financial institution. This part of the world for the last few hundred years has exported, other than oil and gas, nothing. And we have the Islamic finance model. This is the only thing this part of the world has been able to create, aside from oil and gas, which is God-gifted. The only thing that we've been able to bring about that looked kind of successful, and it had elements of sustainability. And I said, that's an interesting thing. Let me look at this and let me embrace this. And what I wanted to do with ADIB is create a role model financial institution that represented the Islamic banking business model. So I wanted to create a role model that will be something that the community of Islamic financial institutions will look up to and say, this is how we want to be. ADIB, when I joined them in the first quarter of 2008, we did at that time a survey to see how we stood in the market in terms of customer service. The survey was conducted by an independent third party. They do that annually for all the banks, all the financial institutions. That year they surveyed 24 institutions. We ranked number 23 in terms of customer service capability. Number 24 had been in the country for 6 months only, so they shouldn't really have used them. We were basically the worst in customer service. And today, for 3 years running, we are the best customer service bank in the country among 51 competing banks. And to bring that change in ADIB for me was a major challenge. How do you bring change with an institution that you want to create a role model out of? How do you bring change? Where do you start? To me, I wanted to start first with customer service. In 2005, I think it was, McKinsey issued a report saying that Islamic banks have high credibility in terms of their ethical standards and what they stand for. Conventional banks that provide Islamic banking services have high credibility in terms of service excellence. Islamic banks have a low credibility in terms of service, and conventional banks have a low credibility in terms of what they stand for. To them, it's just a business to provide Islamic banking products, because you either believe in the values of Islamic banking or you don't. This is not just to make money. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring the best of both worlds in this bank. We have high credibility on our values. The customer says that. And I'm going to bring the best customer service conventional banks have. And I had to sell that to my team. I had a town hall, invited to it 1,000 people, included in that the leadership platform, which at that time were about 100. And I wanted to give them a vision of a better tomorrow. How ADIB, which many customers were loyal to in terms of its values and principles, but many customers complained about its service, how ADIB can be the number one in both. Bring the best of both worlds together and join them and create an unbeatable value proposition. And the turning point in talking with the people was to bring an element of their upbringing. This is an Arab bank, an Islamic bank, and in the Arab culture, hospitality is very important. This is really part of the culture, and you have lots of poetry about hospitality. And I said to them, if I come to your house, how would you treat me? And obviously, the answer was pretty obvious. If you are in your office and I come to visit you in your office, why are you so different? Why do you change? Why do you have a different Jekyll and Hyde personality? Why in your house are you so good? And in your office, where you spend the same amount of time, you have such a lousy service indicator. And I said, do we have split personalities. Why can't you treat your office as you treat your home? When I come to your office, please think of me as your guest. And that was an emotional point I had to find. And when I'm talking to the people, how can I make them turn that angle? And it was extremely powerful. It was very simple, but very powerful. Today, the challenge I face in ADIB is I think we have accomplished a lot. We're 3 times the size we used to be in 2008. We have so many awards as the best this, the best that. But the challenge I face is, and you want to be a role model bank in a small region, it doesn't make sense. If I look at the share of Islamic finance in the UAE, it's about 20% going to 25%. And I predict it will be 50% by the end of this decade. We're doing very well in the GCC. But if I look at it globally, what is the percentage that we have? It's nothing. It's a statistical error almost. So, well, why is this? I mean, we're not preaching religion. We're not trying to convert anyone. This is a business. And it's an ethical business. And after the financial crisis in 2008, you would think that everybody in the world will come running towards an ethical business, embrace it. Regulators and customers and shareholders say, this is what we want to do. Why can't we make that leap? And the challenge I face right now is to deal with the guardians of the values and the principles, the scholars who they consider themselves the guardians of this industry, and try and make them see the opportunity that I see is my biggest challenge, is to make them see that this angle that you can switch and this business model all of a sudden opens up its gates and you can see yourself having 20% market share, not just here, everywhere. There is a convergence in the world between what I would call ethical banks, Islamic banks, and conventional banks. And that convergence is taking place because the customers and the regulators are pushing us together, closer together. Regulation around the world is bringing the basics back into the business. And the basics are basically ethically constructed the glue is ethics inside. It's not mathematics. What makes it come together, the value, is all about ethical principles. And I think regulators are doing that, and the customers are doing that. I'm not sure if we have enough momentum yet globally to see a massive change, but I think the momentum is building up. My mission is to move the needle much more in the Islamic finance industry. And what I want to do with the scholars, hopefully I get their buy-in and their support, is to make the business model far more universal and portable. Something that's portable is something that goes to several markets. It's like McDonald's. It's a portable service, food industry. You can find it in China, you can find it anywhere. And it's become a universal and scalable business. That is my challenge. That is the next thing that I'm trying to do. That's it. That's my speech. Thank you. Do I go back?
Are we going to take any questions? Are there... sorry. Can we take some questions? Any questions for Tirad? Yes, we have one question here.
Hello, marhaba.
I think if you wait a minute, we'll have a microphone for you. A microphone has just come.
My name is Faraj, and I'm a lawyer. You mentioned the important role that a regulator will play in creating the culture for Islamic finance. Do you see that there is that good initiative in the UAE on the part of the regulator, encouraging the legal platform for Islamic finance in particular? Thank you.
Thanks. I think the UAE is a pioneering country. There is a law that governs Islamic finance here. It's a federal law, So that's a good start, and it's a pioneering country, so they were the earliest in this. There is an expectation out there is that, things have to be totally standardized and, everybody plays by the same prescription in Islamic finance. And many people have this and talk about it. And I say, well, that's really an unrealistic expectation. And I don't think regulatory support will bring that expectation to realization. I mean, lawyers around the world will have different opinions, and they all come from the same school. Economists will have different opinions. Why do you want Sharia scholars to have exactly the same prescription for a certain value and principle? So if we talk about that kind of standardization, I don't think that is realistic, and I don't think that is advantageous to have. Diversity brings flexibility, especially with respect to legislation. But the regulatory support that I think we need is to talk about the ecosystem of Islamic finance and what it needs to become robust and sustainable. For example, if you look at the Basel rules around the world, they talk about banks having certain levels of capital adequacy and liquidity, right? Especially the last crisis has made that even more important. And Islamic banks comply with the same rules. So we don't have a different set of rules. We have to have capital adequacy. We have to have a certain level of liquidity. But how do we have liquidity? How do we have liquidity that's profitable? Today, conventional banks invest their cash, which they must maintain a certain level, into bonds and commercial paper. And those bonds and commercial paper portfolios that they hold are tradable, marketable. You can sell them anytime. And that's what makes them liquid. But they earn money. So a conventional bank can put its liquidity in tradable fixed rate instruments issued by sovereigns or parastatals or fantastic companies around the world that have good investment grade ratings. Islamic banks do not have access to this because there are not that enough issues out there of sukuks issued by sovereigns that have a good investment grade rating. We can't just put our money in bonds. It has to be Sharia compliant. It has to comply with the principles. So what we need from the regulators to do is not bring regulation in the UAE. We need them to promote more, the creation of instruments that complete the ecosystem. We want investment instruments that are sovereign in nature, that have a good investment grade rating and would earn a reasonable yield. Then we can put our money in it, and we would be able to comply with the liquidity ratios that Basel wants. Today we comply, but we have our liquidity invested in inferior yielding high grade instruments. So we have the liquidity, but we do not have the return. That's a disadvantage we have, and the support we need is that kind of support. This is the kind of support we need.
Thank you very much, Tirad. I think we have another question.
Very interesting talk. My name is Brian Cattell. Can I ask you, the Malaysian model seems to be immensely successful. Are there any lessons there for this region at all?
I think the difference between Malaysia and the UAE is that maybe Malaysia, there is more centralization with the central bank in terms of supporting the Islamic finance industry. So they are much more engaged, much more proactive in pushing the industry forward. Whereas in the UAE, it is doing its job as a regulator, but not as a promoter. So in Malaysia, the central bank authority acts like a promoter of the business model, not just a regulator. Here they are a regulator. I cannot say the UAE should learn from Malaysia because that would be an unfair statement. I mean, every country in the world has regulation, but sometimes in some countries they're very proactive in promoting, and sometimes they just leave it to the private sector. In the UAE, they've left it to the private sector. So it is us, the private sector, that has to promote the business model. I think, I prefer the private sector to be left alone in promoting its business, but I would like a more proactive support in improving the environment, the ecosystem that Islamic banks need to operate within.
I think we have one more question over here.
The lady.
Oh, and we have a lady down here as well.
Can you start with the lady? She's closer to you.
Thank you. I was talking about from the beginning. Yes, thank you. My name is Claire Woodcraft-Scott. I'm the CEO of Emirates Foundation. When we talk of where we work with youth, I should say, we talk about leadership and business. One of the most critical areas that we see as Emirates Foundation for growing young leaders is helping them to navigate the language of finance. I personally find it shocking that we still don't teach financial literacy in schools. We expect people to navigate a highly complex world where finance is very important. We are currently working with the Ministry of Education in the UAE, and we have a commitment from the Minister to embed financial literacy into the curriculum of all schools in the UAE in the coming years. And if we manage to do that, we'll be the first country in the world to have mandated it. But my question is, we are struggling to get the financial sector on board, to get banks interested in this program. And yet one would have thought that if you have more literate youth, they become better consumers and less risky ones. How can we get more traction and engagement with the banking sector?
This is an important question, and for us in ADIB, it is part of what we do. Financial education is a very important part of what we do. We have issued what we call financial education booklets for families. They're designed not for bankers, they're designed for people who didn't study finance. We now have teams that go and visit educational institutions like high schools, universities, and talk about financial education with young students. We actually do have that. We've started this. I don't know how many educational institutions they have visited so far, but I know it's not, it's beyond the fingers on one hand. It's not easy because it requires enormous effort to do that, and it requires a willing partner on the other side. You want the institutions to embrace this and to invite financial institutions to engage. So far we've been lucky. The institutions that we have contacted have been welcoming, and we have been able to deliver in classroom environments what I would call our share of financial literacy. I don't think that's enough. I think we need to do more. But financial literacy is not just about teaching people about numbers. I think there is a need to talk about how households manage their finances in general. It's a culture issue. This market is a very open market. It's a very competitive market. It's heavily influenced by the West in the way, it's a consumption-based economy. Everybody's out there spending money and having a good time. So the West has had a huge influence in this area in many, many positive ways. But this is one of the areas we need to kind of pay attention to. So financial literacy itself is not enough. I think it's more of the way people think and the way they look at financial planning for the future. We do not have, for example, this is a country that has 80% expats. Some people say 75. I'm not sure. I don't know what the exact number is. It's really high when you're close to 80%. And we do not have a pension scheme for expats. We do not have, not as a government, but companies, they don't provide pension schemes for expatriates who come here fairly young and leave fairly old. And if they were not smart investors, they could have basically blown their life savings, and they're like 78 years old and they have nothing to show for it. So there is a lot to be done here, not just financial education. There's a whole set of things that we need to do.
I know that there are a number of further questions, but I wonder if you can take these up with Tirad over lunch, because it's important that we keep to schedule. So would you please join me in thanking Tirad very much for his exposition on leadership. Thank you.